Most of us grow up thinking memory is stored somewhere in the brain, like a file in a cabinet. But neuroscience has never actually found a single place where a whole memory sits waiting. What seems to be emerging instead is a much more dynamic picture. Memory may be less like storage and more like a living pattern, something that can be reformed in the present through the activity of the brain, the body, the senses, and the environment. So, this talk is really an invitation to look at memory differently, not as something fixed, but as something living. And one clue to this may already be hiding in the way we speak. Think about the kinds of things people say in everyday life. They left an impression on me, or I don't remember it being like that. Those are ordinary phrases, but they may be pointing to something important. They suggest memory is not just a stored record being played back. They suggest something active is happening in the present. We may be sensing, comparing, predicting, updating, and experiencing all at once. So before science fully explains it, everyday language may already be noticing that memory is alive in the present moment. And that leads to a basic question. For decades, neuroscience has tried to answer a familiar question. Where is memory stored? But despite all that work, no one has found a single drawer, shelf, or storage room in the brain where complete memories simply sit intact. That does not mean memory is not real. It may just mean the metaphor is wrong. Instead of one fixed storage place, the evidence points toward distributed change across synapses, pathways, cues, and bodily state. So the question may need to change. Instead of asking, where is memory kept? We may need to ask, how is memory brought back into experience? And that shift takes us away from replay and toward reconstruction. One of the most helpful shifts here is this. Memory may be less like replay and more like reconstruction. A memory can seem absent, but that does not always mean it has been erased. Sometimes the memory is not available because the right cue is missing, or the right bodily state is missing, or the right pathway has not been re-engaged. Then suddenly a smell, a place, a feeling, or a situation brings it back. So memory may not be a complete file being pulled from storage. It may be more like a living pattern being reformed in the present. That is a very different picture from the one many of us were taught. And one way to make that easier to picture is to borrow an analogy from computer memory. Now, I'm not saying the brain is a computer, but sometimes a computer analogy can help us let go of the filing cabinet idea. Modern computer systems do not rely on one simple box called memory. They use layers, temporary states, working memory, persistent forms, addressing and retrieval processes. Different functions operate together, and that analogy can help us picture something important. Human memory may also involve different interacting functions rather than one single hidden storehouse. In fact, the human case may be even more dynamic because our remembering is shaped by sensation, meaning, emotion, bodily state, and context. So the analogy is useful not because humans are machines, but because it helps us picture memory as a process, not just a location. And this is where the neuroscience becomes especially interesting. This brings us to a powerful idea from the Synaptic Self, a book written by Dr. Joseph Ledoux. The idea, in simple terms, is that the self is not fixed once and for all. Who we are is continually shaped through synaptic change. Experience matters because it changes the system. Learning matters because it leaves traces in the patterning of relationships within the nervous system. So memory, from this point of view, is not a static object stored somewhere inside us. It is part of an ongoing plastic process. Some patterns strengthen, some fade, some become hard to access. Some return very powerfully when the right cue appears. That gives us a much more living picture of memory and selfhood. But these changes do not happen in abstraction. They happen through encounter. Memory begins in encounter. We do not live first and then add memory afterwards. From the very beginning, experience comes from through the senses, through sight, sound, touch, smell, taste, internal sensation, emotional tone, and context. And not everything is carried forward equally. Some experiences pass lightly through us, others seem to land more deeply. That means memory is not only about the brain in isolation, it is about a brain in a body, in an environment, meeting the world. The senses do not just record experience, they help shape what becomes memorable. And that may help explain why people so naturally talk about impressions. This is where the language of impression and imprint becomes useful. An impression may be the immediate way an experience lands. It can be quick, partial, shaped by salience. But if that experience is repeated, emotionally charged, meaningful, or revisited, that impression may deepen. It may begin to function more like an imprint, not a rigid category, but a stronger, more enduring pattern. And that matters because what becomes more enduring may go on to shape expectation, recall, emotion, and response. A simple real-life example helps make that clearer. Imagine visiting a place for the first time. You take in something real, but only through the limits of that first encounter. Then you return sometime later. This time you notice more detail, more atmosphere, more relationship between parts, and you find yourself saying, I don't remember it being like that. This is a very interesting moment because what may be happening there is not simple retrieval. The system may be comparing an earlier impression with a richer present encounter. In other words, memory may not just be replaying the past, it may be checking, comparing, and constructing in the present. And that begins to move us toward a wider conceptual model. So here is the direction this leads us in. A living experience is encountered through the senses and through bodily state. Some part of that encounter becomes salient. That salience may form a momentary impression. In many cases, that impression passes. In other cases, especially when there is repetition, emotional significance, or strong physiological relevance, the pattern may become more strongly encoded. And this is where the idea of what we are calling an encoded momentary impression starts to become useful. Something brief in origin, but potentially lasting in consequence. That language keeps us grounded in process, not a static object, a living pattern. And that matters because memory may shape much more than conscious recall. This is where the conversation becomes practical. If living experiences shape encoded impressions, and if those impressions continue to influence prediction and response, then memory may be doing much more than helping us remember the past. It may also help shape emotion, bodily response, relational patterning, and self-regulation. That opens an important bridge between neuroscience and practice. It suggests that what shows up in the present may sometimes reflect living patterns shaped by previous experience. And that is one of the places where our developing in sync and living healing model begins to take shape as a more person centered, regulation first way of understanding what people are living through. So the final question is not just what memory is, but how it continues to live within us. So I'd like to close with this thought. Perhaps memory is not something stored away, but something living that becomes present again, something that can be reformed, refelt, repredicted, and sometimes released. That shift matters scientifically because it fits more closely with plasticity, distributed change, and cue-dependent reformation. But it also matters humanly because it opens a more embodied, person-centered way of thinking about memory, selfhood, regulation, and healing. And that is the direction of the model we are continuing to build. Thank you for listening. I'd be very interested to hear what resonates, what challenges, and where this way of thinking opens something new for you.